Yeah, we had mentioned it earlier on,
Yeah.
that what one source of internal conflict is when the rules are not very clear, and so you have different interpretations or different ideas of how you should proceed, and so then folks start butting heads. And that's a perfect example of this, where not only does it create conflict, but also folks that have been in the party longer, then they start coming out saying, well, in the past, the way that we've always handled it is to do blah blah blah. Okay, but that's not the rule that was written down. Like maybe you had agreement with a few other people to do that, but now there's a new group of people. They didn't necessarily agree to do those things. They don't necessarily even know that that was the rule that you followed. So it, even without purpose, accidentally ends up creating some level of hierarchy and therefore gatekeeping, because like I was saying, the elder folks who have been around say, well, here's how we handled it in the past. Why don't you know this? I'm like, well, you never taught me. Like, how was I supposed to know it?
Because our onboarding sucks.
Yeah. Right. And so there's, and so maybe it's even a good idea, and just new people to the party don't even know it. But maybe it's also an idea that folks don't necessarily agree with, or maybe is obsolete for whatever reason, right? Like maybe it made sense 20 years ago before the internet was a big thing, and and now we do things differently, and that's just how it is. So it's really important to make sure that we're writing down our rules and updating them, and making it clear that there's a process to do amendments and update your rules when necessary, so that things don't become stagnant with in particular with a few people kind of informally running things.
Yeah, having those rules in place is really key, and it can slow things down, right? But it can make sure that things are done democratically, that things are done transparently, that things are done fairly. I can think of an instance where someone in my state party had said some things that weren't weren't in line with green values. People wanted action taken, and because we had process. Well, actually, in this case, because it was the one area we didn't have a process in place, it became very complicated, right? And we immediately passed a process, and even people who would have probably voted against me in the vote said, well, the fact that there was no process is a problem, and it was an oversight, right? So yeah, it's really important to have these things in place, and it's really important to, I think this difference between directive and facilitative is important for Greens, because as bottom up organizers, we that we really should be looking as much as we can to facilitative leadership, right? How can I foster the group's ability to envision, collaborate, and implement projects they can own themselves, as opposed to one or a small group saying, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. During the Occupy movement, I had a roommate, and she had never been politically active before, and she got involved in Occupy, and she regularly came to me and said, "What can I do?" And I'd say, "What do you want to do?" And she'd get, we had some fights over it, good-hearted, roommate, like good-hearted friend fights, but she came from an experience in her life that was very directive. She wanted, she was used to being told what to do, when, and not having any say in it, whether that be her family life, her work life, her school life, all of it, right? And I think that's important. An important thing for us to understand as organizers, right? Most of us experience the world through directive hierarchies, right? Through a hierarchical way, right? We don't have autonomy in our work, right? We have people who tell us what to do. And so it's really hard for us sometimes. Like my friend, right? She just wanted me to tell her what to do. And I kept telling her, if I tell you I want you to do X, but you're not interested in doing X, you're either going to do a shit job or you're not going to do it at all. Right? So what are you interested? So I can find, I can use my knowledge of our organization, and I can use my knowledge of what we're doing, and I can use my longevity, having been here for longer, to get you plugged into the right place with the right people to do something that you care about, that you're passionate about, and you feel ownership of, and that you'll really deliver a high quality outcome, right? As opposed to saying, well, we need someone to go through the database and clean up our data and clean up our contacts. No one wants to deduplicate contacts. Like, no, like that's the quickest way to chase someone away, right? By giving them that as their first job. But it's really, we've been socialized against non-hierarchical facilitative leadership. It really doesn't exist very often in capitalist society, which we all live in our day to day. And we try to bring a little bit of it into our Green Party organizing.
Yeah, we experienced this locally in Pittsburgh in 2017, because after the first Bernie Sanders campaign, naturally a bunch of Bernie Sanders supporters who were very frustrated with the Democratic Party process, they came to the Green Party, which was great. But then a few months later, a bunch of them left. Now, part of that is probably that we weren't as organized as we should have been. And, we should acknowledge that and do better. But part of it is also that, I saw firsthand that many of them, because they came from the Bernie Sanders campaign and they were used to doing work within the Democratic Party, they were used to this directive hierarchy sort of thing. So they came into the Green Party and they said, put me to work, tell me what to do, and we were like,
what do you want? What do you like? What are your skills? And they're like, that doesn't matter. Just tell me what to do.
Right. Where we failed probably was that we didn't have a good onboarding and education process to say, here's a list of things that we could do. Where's your interest, or what sort of training would you like to receive, so that we can help you go organize your community. And they had never really thought of that before, right? They were never asked to organize their community. They were used to someone telling them, here's 1,000 flyers, go to this neighborhood and drop off a flyer at every house. They weren't used to doing things like door knocking and having really deep conversations with people, as an example. And so, again, that was something that we probably should have been more prepared for locally, to educate and to train. But also, I don't think that we fully really understood that when we did suggest things to people, that it didn't make quite as much sense to them, because they were used to this directive thing as opposed to this facilitative, I want to help you with your community, as opposed to, go do this thing. So it's very important to keep that in mind too.
And it's one of the, I mentioned earlier, the decades-long failed project of stealing enough progressive Democrats from the Democratic Party to become viable as the Greens, right? One of the reasons that's been a failed policy is because people coming from that, people coming from that background have these bad habits, right? They've been conditioned to expect this top-down hierarchical leadership, and don't know how to respond. Or I've also seen instances where they use it to try to manipulate the party, right? Not just talking about burners or anything like that, but I've definitely seen people try to push in with strong leadership within within a non-hierarchical system. And if your membership isn't solid in that non-hierarchical system, right? If your membership isn't willing and able to lockstep in defense of these values, they can very easily be pushed aside by a hierarchical centralized push. So that's something we have to deal with over time. And the facilitative, that non-hierarchical system has its weaknesses, but it also has it very much has its strengths in creating something different, right? And that's what we're trying to do. I think we always need to remember that, right? That we're trying to forge a new path, not follow one that's already been blazed, because the path we're looking for doesn't have any examples really. We've got projects we can learn from. We have movements and experiences and theorists we can learn from, but the unique conditions under which we're organizing now means that no one's taken the steps in the exact order that we're going to take them. And so facilitative organizing is really, really important to that, because it takes the blinders off that directive leadership can often get into, where where people can't see beyond the way they think, and their hierarchical position allows them to, you know, negate the outside the box ideas that can come from others.
And you know, to riff on that real fast, I guess kind of a closing argument, right? Because I think we're getting toward the end here. For us to build a movement for a new type of politics and a new type of society, we have to make structures and go down paths that are different than what became before, because we're not trying to be the next Democratic Party, right? We're not trying to be the next Republican Party or whatever it is. We're not trying to be the major party in the system that exists today. We're trying to create a new system and be part of that new system. But it's a new system. It'll work differently. It should work differently if it's built on our green values of, you know, local democracy and social justice and you know, all the key values, right? But one way to get there is that people are naturally they can be skeptical of politicians and politics in general, but especially if you're telling folks like we need this new system, there's a little bit of skepticism, right? About like, well, even if I don't like the thing that exists today, how do we know that your system is going to be better? Like, is it going to be worse? You know, there's that kind of natural worry and fear. And one of the best ways to overcome it is to experience it ourselves, to create it ourselves, and to get practice in it. When we talk about a new system, if we only talk about it abstractly, theoretically, we're not so convincing. If we can say, we've done it this way in my community and my local party and all, and here's how it's worked. We've been doing it for 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and it's worked great. And like, look at all the things that we've accomplished. That's a lot more convincing to people that, you know, we're on the right track. And it allows you to speak from personal experience as opposed to just theory, right? Which again is more convincing. So it's very important for us to practice our values, to put our values into action, experience it ourselves. And we do it through all these ways, like building facilitative leadership, building non-hierarchical structures, creating restorative justice processes, creating consensus processes. All of these things are outside of what people expect in capitalism. So we have to learn how to do it and teach ourselves it, because the capitalist system isn't going to teach us these things. So it's important for us to do it, and it's also important for us to, I think, give ourselves a little bit of slack here. Because we're teaching ourselves new skills, it's not always going to work perfectly, but we will all get better at it together as we practice it more.
And if we're trying to achieve something, if we're trying to forge a new path using the same tools and systems and methods that have gotten us on this one that's not working, we're setting ourselves up for failure, right? If we try to replicate the political model of the Republicans and Democrats to create something different than the outcomes that the Republicans and Democrats get, we're really lying to ourselves about the ability, about our ability to actually achieve what we say we want to achieve. So it's something to keep in mind.